So today is January 16, 2022. Today is January 16, 2022. It is a beautiful Sunday. And further, we are going to be discussing something that's a very extremely important point. And I can't stress enough how important it is, because it is an approach to racial prejudice in America and what this momentous book, The Advent of Divine Justice, discloses on this subject and what we're supposed to do as a framework to resolving this very serious issue. Before we begin, we're going to say an opening prayer for this session number 25 on this Sunday. We're going to say a prayer for the Southern states, and I will begin. O my God, thou seest me in my loneliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the breath of the Holy Spirit? Help me to triumph by the hosts of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all people, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent and the doer of whatsoever thou willest. Now, on a prayer like this, it would be nice to meditate for a longer period in silence and reflect on these words. But as we begin this presentation, I think we can carry that spirit into this presentation, this spirit of reflection. So we begin this session number 25. I'm going to be sharing my screen. Give me a moment while I initiate the share, please. And this PowerPoint is going to be displayed for session number 25. And this session number 25 for today is going to be about exploring the Baha'i approach to addressing racial prejudice in America. We'll be reading paragraphs 53 through 58, and this will be acknowledging human diversity, refuting biological conception of race, the positive discrimination against minorities, freedom from racial prejudice, and progress on race unity. So just a matter of introductions of what is the source material. We're working from the materials provided by Ehsan Bayat of the Crimson Academy. And this was founded in 2011. He has courses on his YouTube page. The Crimson Academy is a very, very valuable resource for learning more about the Baha'i writings, to deepen your understanding of the teachings, and of course, increase in the vision that you start out with before you join and learn more. Now, the Crimson Academy has collated all the materials, notes, study questions, audio and video for individuals and groups to take it upon themselves to study a myriad of different courses. The Crimson Academy encourages the friends to immediately dive in, read the materials, answer the questions, and acquire greater understanding. And first and foremost, the Crimson Academy is always free. Now, concerning these paragraphs we're going to be studying today, the beloved guardian explains the Baha'i perspective on the issue of racism in light of the core teachings of Baha'u'llah, the unity of mankind. He also provides a strategy for both the Black and the white races to abandon racial prejudice and achieve racial unity. Shoghi Effendi cites a number of statements from Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha on the unity of mankind and abandonment of all types of prejudices. Now, I have to ask Jeremiah if you could please read this paragraph 53 and following slide, if Amira, you can also free yourself to read that. It would be greatly appreciated. Please, Jeremiah, paragraph 53.
To discriminate against any race on the ground of its being socially backward, politically immature, and numerically in a minority is a flagrant violation of the spirit that animates the faith of Baha'u'llah. The consciousness of any division or cleavage in its ranks is alien to its very purpose, principles, and ideals. Once its members have fully recognized the claim of its author, and by identifying themselves with its administrative order, accepted unreservedly the principles and laws embodied in its teachings. Every differentiation of class, creed, or color must automatically be obliterated and never be allowed under any pretext. And however great the pressure of events or of a public opinion to reassert itself, if any discrimination is at all to be tolerated, it should be a discrimination not against, but rather in favor of the minority, be it racial or otherwise. Unlike the nations and peoples of the earth, be they of the East or of the West, democratic or authoritarian, communist or capitalist, whether belonging to the old world or the new, who either ignore, trample upon, or extirpate the racial, religious, or political minorities within the sphere of their jurisdiction, every organized community enlisted under the banner of Baha'u'llah should feel it to be its first and inescapable obligation to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it.
Now, before we move on, I want to highlight the last sentence. And Jeremiah, if you could please read the last sentence. And let's actually start, irrespective of what I just said, let's start here at, can you see my mouse where I say if any?
Yes.
Okay.
If any discrimination is at all to be tolerated, it should be discrimination not against, but rather in favor of the minority, be it racial or otherwise. Unlike the nations and peoples of the earth, be they of the East or of the West, democratic or authoritarian, communist or capitalist, whether belonging to the old world or the new, who either ignore, trample upon, or extirpate the racial, religious, or political minorities within the sphere of their jurisdiction, every organized community enlisted under the banner of Baha'u'llah should feel it to be its first and inescapable obligation to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it.
So, reflecting on this, what, before we move on, can we understand from this one sentence?
The minority is key and paramount.
Yes. And further in the highlighted and underlying text, what do we take away from that?
But that is like there are situations where I could see a minority in favor of what I would perceive as not in this context. Like okay, faith, race, class. The minority in each of those categories is the one that's supposed to receive the favoritism, correct? So is it only in specification to this? So it doesn't matter which country it is. It doesn't matter which circumstance. If it falls within the category of faith, race, or class, that's where the minorities should be favored. Is that my understanding? Is that what you get?
This looks to be a little more comprehensive. If you look at what it says the racial, religious, or political minorities. You have the political minority, you have the religious minority, and the racial minority. And that it is the Baha'i community's number one obligation, and those who ascribe to these values, to nurture, to encourage, to safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it. And let's not forget where it states racial, religious, and political minorities. So think of it in a society where you have difference of opinion. One who has a minority opinion should not be persecuted for their minority opinion, nor should one who belongs to a minority race or a minority religion. So in short, this is broader than just targeting racial prejudice. It is about prejudices of any kind relating to what we do not yet understand or know or originate from. So racial prejudice is one, religious prejudice is another, political prejudice is another. And the people who belong to the minority group, they are afforded under the values of the Baha'i message. They are afforded an obligation by the majority that they are given the right to be nurtured. They are given the right to be encouraged. They're given the right to be safeguarded. This is a right that is given. It is no longer a privilege. It is a right that the minority be nurtured, encouraged, and safeguarded. Because again, it is our first and inescapable obligation, an affirmative duty. How do you do that? You can't do it under the moral system that we have now. You can't do it under the legal system we have now. You can't do that under the regulations that are in place now, which act in stopping people. And of course, we can't, with the framework we have now, expect to enforce an affirmative duty. So this is ultimately a moral development that must needs take place in the heart of the individual for any system to ensure this takes place really to be developed. And the first step is by understanding that this is a first and inescapable obligation to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it. And to ignore this would be very, very foolish of all of us. It is very clear this is about racial, religious, or political minorities within the sphere of this jurisdiction we're talking about. So if we're talking about a minority within your faith, your race. So let's say that within the Baha'i faith, we have a racial minority or religious minority or political minority within the scope of our society. We have the duty to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every single one of these that we determine to be a minority. That is clearly on its face a minority. Now, if you are in a nation with minorities, even more minorities are going to exist of different kinds, be it racial, religious, or political. And they, if you ascribe to these values, must be nurtured, encouraged, and safeguarded. Now, I think we can elaborate more on this going further, but we needed to be amply clear that these statements, as they can be read on their face very clearly, are extremely weighty in their power and broad in their scope. And the implications need a paradigm shift in what it means to be human. For us to truly address this, we need to reimagine what it means to be a human being. Can we move to the next slide? Of course, I'm the one. One moment, please. Amira, could you please read this slide?
So great and vital is this principle that in such circumstances as when an equal number of ballots have been cast in an election, or where the qualifications for any office are balanced as between the various races, faiths, or
Amira, I'm sorry, it's hard to hear you. Later on, when you don't have that much background, we can you can please volunteer to read, and we would love to have you read. It's just the background noise is making it difficult for me to understand. I apologize. Jeremiah, could you please read this again from the beginning?
Sure. So great and vital is this principle that in such circumstances as when an equal number of ballots have been cast in an election, or where the qualifications for any office are balanced as between the various races, faiths, or nationalities within the community, priority should unhesitatingly be accorded the party representing the minority. And this for no other reason except to stimulate and encourage it and afford it an opportunity to further the interests of the community. In the light of this principle, and bearing in mind the extreme desirability of having the minority elements participate and share responsibility in the conduct of Baha'i activity, it should be the duty of every Baha'i community so to arrange its affairs that in cases where individuals belonging to the diverse minority elements within it are already qualified and fulfill the necessary requirements, Baha'i representative institutions, be they assemblies, conventions, conferences, or committees, may have represented on them as many of these diverse elements, racial or otherwise, as possible. The adoption of such a course and faithful adherence to it would not only be a source of inspiration and encouragement to those elements that are numerically small and inadequately represented, but would demonstrate to the world at large the universality and representative character of the faith of Baha'u'llah and the freedom of his followers from the taint of those prejudices which have already wrought such havoc in the domestic affairs as well as foreign relationships of the nations.
Thank you so much for sharing this and reading it. The next paragraph, 54, freedom from racial prejudice in any of its forms should, at a time as this, when an increasingly large section of the human race is falling a victim to its devastating ferocity, be adopted as the watchword of the entire body of the American believers. In whichever state they reside, in whatever circles they move, whatever their age, traditions, tastes, and habits, it should be consistently demonstrated in every phase of their activity and life, whether in the Baha'i community or outside it, in public or in private, formally as well as informally, individually as well as in their official capacity as organized groups, committees, and assemblies. It should be deliberately cultivated through the various and everyday opportunities, no matter how insignificant, that present themselves, whether in their homes, their business offices, their schools and colleges, their social parties and recreation grounds, their Baha'i meetings, conferences, conventions, summer schools, and assemblies. It should, above all else, become the keynote of the policy of that august body, which in its capacity as the national representative and a director and coordinator of the affairs of the community, must set the example and facilitate the application of such a vital principle to the lives and activities of those whose interests it safeguards and represents. Paragraph 55. O ye discerning ones, Baha'u'llah has written, verily the words which have descended from the heaven of the will of God are the source of unity and harmony for the world. Close your eyes to racial differences and welcome all with the light of oneness. Close your eyes to racial differences and welcome all with the light of oneness. We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, he proclaims, that all nations should become one in faith, and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that the diversity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. Baha'u'llah hath said, writes Abdul Baha, that the various races of humankind lend a composite harmony and beauty of color to the whole. Let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side, without discord or disagreement between them. Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha Morvar has said, once compared the colored people to the black people of the eye surrounded by the white. In this black people is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the Spirit shineth forth. Jeremiah, could you please read this paragraph 56?
God, Abdul Baha himself declares, maketh no distinction between the white and the black. If the hearts are pure, both are acceptable unto him. God is no respecter of persons on account of either color or race. All colors are acceptable unto him, be they white, black, or yellow. Inasmuch as all were created in the image of God, we must bring ourselves to realize that all embody divine possibilities. In the estimation of God, he states, all men are equal. There is no distinction or preference for any soul in the realm of his justice and equity. God did not make these divisions. He affirms these divisions have had their origin in man himself. Therefore, as they are against the plan and purpose of God, they are false and imaginary. In the estimation of God, he again affirms, there is no distinction of color. All are one in the color and beauty of servitude to him. Color is not important. The heart is all important. It mattereth not what the exterior may be. If the heart is pure and white within, God doth not behold differences of hue and complexion. He looketh at the hearts. He whose morals and virtues are praiseworthy is preferred in the presence of God. He who is devoted to the kingdom is most beloved. In the realm of Genesis and creation, the question of color is of least importance. Throughout the animal kingdom, he explains, we do not find the creatures separated because of color. They recognize unity of species and oneness of kind. If we do not find color distinction drawn in a kingdom of lower intelligence and reason, how can it be justified among human beings, especially when we know that all have come from the same source and belong to the same household? In origin and intention of creation, mankind is one. Distinctions of race and color have arisen afterward. Man is endowed with superior reasoning, power, and the faculty of perception. He further explains, he is the manifestation of divine bestowals. Racial ideas prevail and obscure the creative purpose of unity in his kingdom? One of the important questions, he significantly remarks, which affect the unity and the solidarity of mankind is the fellowship and equality of the white and colored races.
Interesting. One of the important questions, he significantly remarks, which affect the unity and solidarity of mankind, is the fellowship and equality of the white and colored races. Between these two races, certain points of agreement and points of distinction exist, which warrant just and mutual consideration. The points of contact are many. In this country, the United States of America, patriotism is common to both races. All have equal rights to citizenship, speak one language, receive the blessings of the same civilization, and follow the precepts of the same religion. In fact, numerous points of partnership and agreement exist between the two races, whereas the one point of distinction is that of color. Shall this, the least of all distinctions, be allowed to separate you as races and individuals? This variety in forms and coloring, he stresses, which is manifest in all the kingdoms, is according to creative wisdom and hath a divine purpose. The diversity in the human family, he claims, should be the cause of love and harmony, as it is in music, where many different notes blend together in the making of a perfect chord. I think we should take a step back and just think on this one passage here, this one part of the paragraph 56 that we just were reading. Jeremiah, what do you think of this point of color being the least of distinctions? As it says, I will put my mouse here, the least of all distinctions. The question, shall this, the least of all distinctions, be allowed to separate you as races and individuals? What do you think of this, Jeremiah?
Of course not. You know, it's insane to think of it in that capacity. You know, I think today the problem or the reason that people so easily try to justify the distinction between the races is because they also see it as a cultural representation of how people behave.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I think they use it as the easiest way in which to communicate those feelings. But
genetically, we're all one.
Yeah, genetically, and from a very animalistic standpoint, it's such an insane reason to have an argument with a person about.
I mean, the fact that we've discovered in the previous presentations the level of ignorance that we had towards other peoples as a planet, just defining someone who looks differently as if they're another species. It's amazing the progress we've made in one sense, but yet it's still astounding that we were actually ever thinking that way. To imagine that scientifically a species is different from only another species if it cannot have reproduction with that other species, if in reproducing, if possible, its offspring is unable to reproduce.
Right. Yeah. The limitation from a purely biological standpoint, that's the demarcation point. And it's amazing that, but who knows, you know, things are getting crazy with science. So they might be able to.
The fact is, though, that every human who belongs to all races on this planet, and I'm discounting actual illnesses that people have, every human on this planet that does not have some kind of disease or defect where, again, this belongs to people of all races. All these things we don't want to interfere with our reproduction. But stressing on the point that every human being on this planet could potentially be able to marry each other and bear offspring that will then be able to also bear offspring. That in of itself says that we are one human race. We are one species. We are not separate. We are not different from each other like cats and dogs to humans. We are unique to every other species, but to every other human being, we are not unique in that we can have children, have a family, and start something beautiful together. And that's the difference between a species. If your species is different from the other species, it means that you cannot ultimately produce offspring that can reproduce. If your offspring can reproduce, that means you're of the same species. If you talk about a lion and a tiger, for example, there's different ways they make it liger. The whole point is there's different versions of mixes you can make between lions and tigers. But after all is said and done, their offspring cannot have offspring. A horse and a donkey has a mule. A mule can't have offspring. To create a mule, you're going to have to literally make a horse and a donkey reproduce each time you develop a mule for use as a work animal or just to have a mule. You're not going to have mules reproducing. And that's something that has been common for ages, and it's established already that there was this idea that the races should not intermarry, the human race. However, we clearly understand that that is just a creation of diseased minds. That is not something that is scientifically valid, nor is it in the case of religion valid. Paragraph 56 continued.
If you meet, is his admonition, those of a different race and color from yourself, do not mistrust them and withdraw yourself into your shell of conventionality, but rather be glad and show them kindness. In the world of being, he testifies, the meeting is blessed when the white and colored races meet together with infinite spiritual love and heavenly harmony. When such meetings are established and the participants associate with each other with perfect love, unity, and kindness, the angels of the kingdom praise them, and the beauty of Baha'u'llah addresseth them. Blessed are ye, blessed are ye. When a gathering of these two races is brought about, he likewise asserts that assemblage will become the magnet of the concourse on high, and the confirmation of the blessed beauty will surround it. Strive earnestly, he again exhorts both races, and put forth your greatest endeavor towards the accomplishment of this fellowship and the cementing of this bond of brotherhood between you. Such an attainment is not possible without will and effort on the part of each. From one, expressions of gratitude and appreciation. From the other, kindliness and recognition of equality. Each one should endeavor to develop and assist the other towards mutual advancement. Love and unity will be fostered between you, thereby bringing about the oneness of mankind. For the accomplishment of unity between the colored and the white will be an assurance of the world's peace.
To stress the sentence, strive earnestly and put forth your greatest endeavor toward the accomplishment of this fellowship and the cementing of this bond of brotherhood between you. As described earlier, to establish brotherhood, you need to be able to form a family. And it's very, very scientifically possible to have families. There's nothing stopping our species from marriage among itself. We are one human race.
I hope he thus addresses members of the white race, that you may cause that downtrodden race to become glorious and to be joined with the white race to serve the world of man with the utmost sincerity, faithfulness, love, and purity. This opposition, enmity, and prejudice among the white race and the colored cannot be effaced except through faith, assurance, and the teachings of the blessed beauty. This question of the union of the white and the black is very important, he warns, for if it is not realized, ere long great difficulties will arise and harmful results will follow. If this matter remaineth without change, is yet another warning. Enmity will be increased day by day, and the final result will be hardship and may end in bloodshed.
If this matter remaineth without change, is yet another warning. Enmity will be increased day by day, and the final result will be hardship and may end in bloodshed. Those are powerful words.
A tremendous effect is required by both races if their outlook, their manners, and conduct are to reflect in this darkened age the spirit and teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah, casting away once and for all the fallacious doctrine of racial superiority with all its attendant evils, confusion, and miseries, and welcoming and encouraging the intermixture of races and tearing down the barriers that now divide them. They should each endeavor day and night to fulfill their particular responsibilities and the common task, which so urgently faces them. Let them, while each is attempting to contribute its share to the solution of this perplexing problem, call to mind the warnings of Abdu'l-Baha and visualize, while there is yet time, the dire consequences that must follow if this challenging and unhappy situation that faces the entire American nation is not definitively remedied.
So going to the second sentence, casting away once and for all the fallacious doctrine of racial superiority with all its attendant evils, confusion and miseries, and welcoming and encouraging the intermixture of races, and tearing down the barriers that now divide them. They should each endeavor day and night to fulfill their particular responsibilities in the common task which so urgently faces them. Now, let's take a look at this doctrine of racial superiority. This is applicable to everyone. Would you agree, Jeremiah?
Yes. But I would think more so it applies specifically to the majority.
Yes, it applies to the majority because they, of all people, have the ability to make bigger problems of it. But it applies to everyone, correct?
Yes.
So that means, as it relates to racial superiority, for this solution to really happen, we need to strive to eliminate this doctrine of racial superiority in all senses, with all its attendant evils, confusion, and miseries. And as we encourage this intermixture of races, like we discussed as well, ultimately marriage between people of different races, we need to tear down these barriers that we still see dividing us. And these barriers usually have to do with egos. And I don't know how else you feel superior to someone else without an ego that doesn't just support it, but it buttresses every single idea with whatever you want it to be, but it can't be, because this ego feeling better than someone else, this sense of racial superiority in the doctrine and all these teachings that people can say will support the superiority of one race over another, it needs to be abolished. It needs to be torn down, all these barriers. The most important, the mental barriers. Let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share. This is paragraph 58. We're reading paragraph 58. Let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Let the Negroes, through a corresponding effort on their part, show by every means in their power the warmth of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. This is the framework from the Advent of Divine Justice, this book written by Shoghi Effendi in the 1930s, while America was still far off from this civil rights movement that we now identify as the emancipation of people from this life of segregation at the time. This is a framework for people in America to put aside their differences and to come together and work together, work hard to bring themselves together. He addresses both the whites and the Negroes, as it was termed at the time. He says, let the white make a supreme effort. And further, that they need to master, I'll put my mouse here, they need to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. People need patience. And yet, on the other end, Shoghi Effendi directs at the Negroes very clearly that they need to focus on their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. So in one sense, there is this clear need for patience on one end, and there is a clear need to wipe out every trace of suspicion. And he very clearly says, unequivocal here, let neither think, the white or black, let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. So this is not a responsibility of one race. It is not one race's job to fix things or to bring each other together. It is both. It is everyone's job. And it is not something that is expected to be so easy. We can't expect it to be an easy solution that happens immediately. It's something that has to take time. As very clearly was stated, there are slow healing wounds. So it is understood there are slow healing wounds that need to heal. It is understood that there is a need for patience. It is also understood that in this process, this suspicion of being betrayed, this suspicion which happened as a result of the reason why all these wounds were inflicted and the systematic oppression that occurred, it also needs to be wiped out, that suspicion. So it's a process for everyone to work on coming together. Everyone is a piece. No one is the whole. Everyone needs to rely on each other, and it's not going to happen overnight. But stepping forward with the first step is a start on this process. And this right here is this framework in paragraph 58 that people really need to read and reflect on, because it's a two-way street, as it clearly shows. It is a two-way street. It is not a one-way street. There are valid feelings on both sides, but to state that one is not entitled to their feelings on either side is also inappropriate. People need to grow together, and that means they're going to naturally hurt each other as they grow and learn from their mistakes. But to do that, we need to be having an open heart, and we need to put our egos aside and allow ourselves to be subject to scrutiny so that we can learn from each other, not continuously insult one another or something that people ultimately can't change. But we need to feel each other and the feelings each other have so that we can move forward slowly but surely, understanding one another and being a little more introspective. Introspectiveness, thinking on the actions that we've committed during the course of our lives, during the course of our day, in the course of our conversation with our special friends that we are speaking with on these special subjects. Thinking about the weight of what we're saying and thinking about the weight of the reaction. And also thinking about how the other feels when you are trying to assist them to understand. Jeremiah, could you please read this? Continuation of paragraph 58, please.
Let neither think that they can wait confidently for the solution of this problem until the initiative has been taken and the favorable circumstances created by agencies that stand outside the orbit of their faith. Let neither think that anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. Let them rather believe and be firmly convinced that on their mutual understanding, their amity and sustained cooperation must depend more than any other force or organization operating outside the circle of their faith. The deflection of that dangerous course so greatly feared by Abdu'l-Baha and the materialization of the hopes he cherished for their joint contribution to the fulfillment of that country's glorious destiny.
So major key points from paragraphs 53 through 58. Abdu'l-Baha acknowledges that physical diversity of human beings is caused by environmental factors. And any form of discrimination based on race is strongly condemned in the Baha'i teachings. Abdu'l-Baha rejects the biological concept of race and confirms that the concept of race is a social reality constructed, promoted, and accepted by the human mind. According to the Baha'i teachings, there is only one human species. While the construct of race is based on some physical differences, it has no reality. Now, as we look at the genetics of a human being, we discussed how a species to copulate, to have a offspring with one another, for a species to have offspring that can also have offspring. That is the same species. Now, humans have different phenotypes, different physical differences. We have physical differences, different phenotypes, expressions in how you see someone. But our genotype, which is the fundamental makeup of what is a human being genetically, what is the instructions for our human body to operate, what is the basis of a human being, our DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, this chemical of which we are all made up of, that requires any human being is required to have. We are all the same genetically. There is minimal difference between one human being and another, such that there is a diversity among the same species, which we call now races, but we are still the same species. We don't look at dogs and say, this dog is not a dog. If it can have another pup, it can have a litter of puppies. They're all dogs. Why is it, if we are able to treat animals with an understanding, scientifically speaking, that they are one species, why is it we can't understand that human beings are one species altogether? And finally here, discriminating against a particular group of people because of physical characteristics such as skin color is unacceptable. So these Baha'i teachings listed here on this page is something that religion has brought and science has confirmed afterward. For this is something that clearly people were not thinking about, but now is more commonly understood, but it is not yet fully accepted. We have people of both the white, the black, the red, the yellow, whichever race you want to call it on this planet. We have people of various races on this planet today that they believe themselves superior to another. They believe themselves that they are the one and only. They are the chosen. No one is better than another. Biologically speaking, we are all one. And spiritually speaking, we are too. We come from the same God and we have the same rights as each other. And that cannot change. That is a spiritual reality. Now, the beloved guardian explains that discrimination based on race is only acceptable if it is in the form of positive discrimination in favor of minorities. Tremendous effort is required by both white and black races in their relationship with each other to reflect the spirit and teachings of the faith, abandoning forever the false doctrine of racial superiority. Although universally condemned in principle, racism has survived as a social attitude. That is, we're talking in America, but it is still very alive as well around the world. Although people may not want to admit it, this is a world issue, and you are seeing a microcosm of that here in America. In paragraph 53, the beloved guardian explains that the Baha'i perspective on the issue of racism, while human diversity is acknowledged in the Baha'i faith as being desirable, while human diversity is acknowledged in the Baha'i faith as being desirable, any form of discrimination based on race is strongly condemned. The principle of the unity of mankind that embraces human diversity is the core teaching of the revelation of Baha'u'llah and reflects its opposition to any type of racism. And here we have a quote from Abdul Baha. It says on the right in the image, "The happiness of mankind lieth in the unity and the harmony of the human race." Now, the Baha'i perspective on race, the beloved guardian explicitly highlights this important teaching of the faith. And this is from a letter written on his behalf to an individual believer in February 16, 1935. In regard to your question concerning the Baha'i attitude towards the colored race, it is only evident that the principle of the oneness of mankind, which is the main pivot around which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, precludes the possibility of considering race as a bar to any intercourse, be it social or otherwise. The faith, indeed, by its very nature and purpose, transcend all racial limitations and differences, and proclaims the basic and essential unity of the entire human race. Racial prejudice of whatever nature and character is therefore severely condemned, and as such should be wiped out by the friends in all their relations, whether private or social. I'll say this last sentence again. Racial prejudice of whatever nature and character is therefore severely condemned, and as such should be wiped out by the friends in all their relations, whether private or social. And as I said earlier, the faith indeed by its very nature and purpose transcends all racial limitations and differences and proclaims the basic and essential unity of the entire human race.
So can we go
Shoghi
back?
Effendi, come again?
When it says private, what does it mean?
Here?
Context, yes. So
That's an
is
excellent question.
and inside my heart means?
That is a very good question. I think so. I
Okay.
think that's a very good explanation. Jeremiah, what do you think?
That sounds good to me. You know, whether it's something that you are overtly about or whether you are passively somewhat secretive of, doesn't matter.
Well, when I was interestingly in school talking with people, and this applies to people of all races while I was in school, it was interesting to me, and I didn't understand it, but I understand it's a thing, and hence why I'm talking about it, that people would openly say that they won't consider a person of a certain race in terms of getting to know them for the purpose of maybe getting married. That they would never consider a person of a specific race being someone that they want to have in their life, to even look at being a possible life partner, a companion in all of the worlds of God in marriage. It was intriguing to me. And currently it is legal, and I'm not saying that we should change laws to govern the heart, for that is impossible. But it is legal to, in many places in the world, I have not heard of a place that it is illegal. It is legal to be as prejudiced as you like in terms of who you marry. Any and all forms of prejudice you can have in terms of who you marry. However, here, as a Baha'i or one who ascribes to these ideals, the ideals we are listing here, it is severely condemned and it should be wiped out in your private relations. So if your reason not to be with someone as a companion in all the worlds of God in marriage, if your reason to not consider someone for such an important task, if your reason to not become someone's friend because of such a difference, it is something that should be wiped out from your heart. This feeling of prejudice towards someone simply because of the color of their skin. Amira, what do you think of that? Oh, I can hear you from the other room, but I can't hear you here.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay. Thank you for that very important contribution.
Yes, thank you. And that was a very nice summation, John.
Thank you, Jeremiah. The idea is trying to work together, and more importantly, it's very nice that Ehsan, really, though he's not here in person to discuss this himself, he really was able to bring these excellent sources that we're just really looking at because he brought it together. So, Crimson Academy.
Yes, thank you, Ehsan.
Shoghi Effendi strongly asserts in paragraph 53 that discrimination against any race on the ground of its being socially backward, politically immature, and numerically in a minority is a flagrant violation of the spirit that animates the faith of Baha'u'llah. Jeremiah, do you have any thoughts on that? Amira?
No, I mean, I was just looking at socially backward, politically immature, numerically in a minority. So, meaning the perception that from a cultural standpoint, they're inferior, or from a political standpoint, they're not wise enough to, quote unquote, be effective in government or governance. And then numerically in a minority is just because they're not the majority. So they're disregarded as, from the context that majority rules.
But yes, this is something that used to happen, and it still happens actually today. And I've heard it with my own ears, spoken by people who genuinely believe these things. People can believe to support their racist ideology, and this applies of people of all races. This applies to people of all races, where they may believe that because their people developed something or did it first or what have you, that for some reason they're superior because their race did something first, because their race did XYZ. Doesn't matter what it is. The point that they say that their race achieved XYZ first, it is abhorrent. It is abhorrent to say that one is better than the other simply because they access the truth first. The way I see it is neither of us, all of us speaking today, have been alive when almost everything I've ever been told that a certain race did first ever accomplished it. Thousands of years ago, something happening, justifying why someone today is better than someone else, it's very laughable. And that's one reaction to take, but it's very, very abhorrent. With that being said, we have here every organized community enlisted under the banner of Baha'u'llah should feel it to be its first and inescapable obligation to nurture, encourage, and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class, or nation within it. And we described those minorities as well. It was race, religion, and
Class.
Political.
So this quote, which was highlighted here, as Ehsan so graciously highlighted earlier in the larger passage excerpt, it's extremely important. We said it then, we say it now. We need to be nurturing. We need to encourage and safeguard every minority. And that means, as we just mentioned, race, religion, and political minorities. all three of these, we know in America, are under scrutiny by the majority, whatever the majority may be, in whichever circumstance you see it. And as people who ascribe to this message, it is our duty to do something about it, to nurture them, encourage them, and safeguard them. And everyone who sees this and believes in this way that the world should be, we encourage you to do this because it's valuable to every person that feels marginalized. It's valuable to everyone who feels alone, to have that person who stands up for them when no one else does. I see we have a raised hand. Amira, please.
The word class here, I was thinking, what are the classes that we have here?
In America?
Mhm.
That's a very explosive discussion depending on who's in the conversation. But to make it as commonly accepted and objective as I can, and Jeremiah, please, as you can contribute, provide. We have in America right now classes built on wealth. It's the wealth status that you have, but you also have some fluidity at the moment in terms of the political makeup as well of our country that is causing a little bit of a different structure to occur. It's not something that I can authoritatively in any sense describe, and really in my belief any person, even if they call themselves an expert on this, really describe. America, as it was termed the melting pot, it was termed a place of great diversity over the past century and still is today. America is a very unique place where you have really overnight the creation of a new class as well. And you have amazing people who have risen up who may have been against this class system, who abolished certain classes that may have existed. And in effect, new classes may have replaced those classes that existed. I'll give an example. You have in the materialism atmosphere that we have today, we have this idea of billionaires and the middle class and the working class. So you have the working class, which is considered the people that are working maybe 2, 3, 4, who knows how many jobs to make it just to survive. And then you have the middle class, which are people that you could say are somewhat, they're not wealthy per se. They can be, if you determine the middle class to include somewhat well-off people. But the middle class would be people who generally have a home. They may have a housing payment for the mortgage to pay still. They have maybe some loans that they're taking, but the source of their income is enough to both shoulder their loans, their liabilities, and to provide for food and other amenities to maybe have children and whatnot in a comfortable climate as would be considered a single family home. I'm not sure about the white picket fence, but perhaps maybe a white picket fence too.
Oh, here, so it says every organized community. So is it like individuals in a community, or is it like an institution that needs to nurture and encourage and safeguard the minority?
As you described it, every organized community. That is something that I believe can be interpreted as both the institution, absolutely the institution. So an institution could be created, which would be a government institution. It could also be non-governmental institutions, NGOs. It could be local spiritual assemblies. You can have several forms of communities created in that sense, as well as what composes the community. So what composes a community? It's people. You, me, Jeremiah, and anyone else who you consider to be a natural living person. Those would be community members. So it starts at the basic unit, which is you and me.
As individuals, what can we do to, like, what is it that I can do that is nurturing, encouraging, safeguarding the minorities?
Well, when you see someone is clearly a minority and has been marginalized and they're alienated, you can see clearly that if you can imagine in your mind, you're in a cafeteria with a bunch of people and everyone's eating their food, they're talking to one another, but this sad individual who has been unable to find anyone who will entertain them is found sitting by themselves at a table, alone. No one's there. As a member of the community who sees a marginalized person, it is the right thing to do to make that person feel welcome. And if you're a part of a group, invite them to your group. That is, to your table, in this case, in a cafeteria. Come and eat with us. We don't want you sitting alone. Eat with us. Let's eat together. Let's break bread together. That's one sense. Another, you can go and sit with them, get to know them one-on-one. There's a lot of creative ways to make people feel welcome. And I just mentioned two that I could think of on the top of my mind in a cafeteria setting with a person who may have been marginalized because they could find no one that they could sit with. Simply that. And these circumstances, ironically, seem to be to me one of the most influential moments you could really have with other people in forming friendships, in forming bonds of unity that didn't exist or wouldn't have existed had it not been for these moments and encountering them. I brought up a poor example in the sense that it is circumstantial to a cafeteria setting, but if you, the viewer, and of course Amira, if you can identify with this in principle, the principles that I'm evoking, then I think, I believe, I hope you can take this, use a syllogism, use a sense of, well, he did it in this situation. What about my situation? I can see how it translates here into my situation. If you can translate it into your own situation and understand these moments that arise in your life and do something about it, then I believe part of my time speaking here is well spent, because one person didn't need to be marginalized. One person didn't need to feel alone. And you, the listener, were someone, you were that person to be a solution, not a part of the problem. Thank you, Amira, so much for that question. But yeah, she pointed it out very well. Organized community. That's at all levels, from the individual all the way up to nations. Now, as we go to the next section here, we have these two beautiful quotes. Amira, would you like to read this?
We have flown the air like birds and swum the sea like fishes, but have yet to learn the simple act of walking the earth like brothers. Martin Luther King, Jr. From the Baha'i perspective, racism is one of the most painful and persistent evils in society. Racial discrimination is painful because it violates the dignity of human beings, and yet it persists. Racism is poisonous because it cripples its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Baha'i International Community.
Wow. This quote, I can't count the sentences. I think I'm reading 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. These 4 short sentences explain why racism is so bad. Racism is poisonous because it cripples its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Jeremiah, could you please read this on acknowledging human diversity, please?
His Holiness Abdul Baha acknowledges that physical diversity of human beings is caused by environmental factors, resulting in different colors of skin, facial features, heights, and other physical characteristics. In a talk given at Hull House in Chicago, Abdul Baha states that such differences, though observed between individuals, should be treated as being less important than the similarities. In the human kingdom itself, there are points of contact, properties common to all mankind. Likewise, there are points of distinction which separate race from race, individual from individual. If the points of contact, which are the common properties of humanity, overcome the peculiar points of distinction, unity is assured. On the other hand, if the points of differentiation overcome the points of agreement, disunion and weakness result.
On the other hand, if the points of differentiation overcome the points of agreement, disunion and weakness result. This seems logical to me, and I encourage you to think on it. What is the logic behind this statement? Take some time, reflect, because as we look at what we have in common, as we focus on what we have in common, this unity develops. But as we focus on what's different, as they become more valuable than the points of agreement, then disunion and weakness result. It's one thing to be grateful for unity and diversity, but it's another thing to focus on areas of differences as a reason why we can't be together. Could you please read this, Jeremiah?
Abdul Baha states, one of the important questions which affect the unity and the solidarity of mankind is the fellowship and equality of the white and colored races. Between these two races, certain points of agreement and points of distinction exist which warrant just and mutual consideration. The points of contact are many, for in the material or physical plane of being, both are constituted alike and exist under the same law of growth and bodily development. Furthermore, both live and move in the plane of the senses and are endowed with human intelligence. There are many other mutual qualifications. In this country, the United States of America, patriotism is common to both races. All have equal rights to citizenship, speak one language, receive the blessings of the same civilization, and follow the precepts of the same religion. In fact, numerous points of partnership and agreement exist between the two races, whereas the one point of distinction is that of color. Shall this, the least of all distinctions, be allowed to separate you as races and individuals? In physical bodies, in the law of growth, in the sense endowment, intelligence, patriotism, language, citizenship, civilization, and religion, you are one and the same. A single point of distinction exists, that of racial color. God is not pleased with, neither should any reasonable or intelligent man be willing to recognize inequality in the races because of this distinction.
in physical bodies, in the law of growth, in sense endowment, intelligence, patriotism, language, citizenship, civilization, and religion. You are one and the same. A single point of distinction exists, that of racial color. God is not pleased with, neither should any reasonable or intelligent man be willing to recognize inequality in the races because of this distinction. That is powerful. God is not pleased with inequality in the races because of this distinction, the distinction of racial color. So the Baha'i perspective on race. His Holiness Abdul-Baha in another tablet refers to the diverse groups of people in the world as races and tribes. In a word, the age is ours when fellowship is to be established. The century has come when all the nations are to be unified. The century has come when all the nations shall enjoy international peace. The century has come when all the races and tribes of the world shall do away with racial prejudice and associate fully. The century has arrived when all the natives of the world shall prove to be one home of the human family. Thus may mankind in its entirety rest comfortably and in peace under the great and broad tabernacle of the one Lord. Amira, did you just raise your hand, or is this?
It was your lady's feet.
Oh, okay. So baby touch screen, got it. Let me see. Let me put your hand down. One moment. Thank you for letting me know. All right. So, Jeremiah Rose, do you have any reflections on this? I will say 1 point.
No, I don't.
Yes.
I don't. Go
Okay.
ahead. Sorry.
No worries. I'll say 1 point. And this is revealed by Abdul-Baha. And this is what the fundamental basis of this world unity implies, that all the means to establish, to preserve, and to maintain this world unity, that is this equality among the peoples, it needs to be established and protected. Refuting biological concept of race. His Holiness Abdul-Baha acknowledges human diversity, and the translation uses the term race to refer to different groups of people with similar physical characteristics. He rejects the biological concept of race and confirms that the concept of race is a social reality constructed, promoted, and accepted by the human mind. In a talk given in Paris, Abdul-Baha highlights that the apparent multiplicity of religions, races, and nations are all divisions of man's making only, and are necessary only in his thought. Religions, races, and nations are all divisions of man's making only, and are necessary only in his thought. In another talk delivered at the Church of the Messiah in Montreal, Canada, His Holiness Abdul-Baha states, all humanity are the children of God. They belong to the same family, to the same original race. There can be no multiplicity of races, since all are the descendants of Adam. This signifies that racial assumption and distinction are nothing but superstition, In the estimate of God, there are no English, French, Germans, Turkish, or Persians. All these in the presence of God are equal. They are of one race and creation. God did not make these divisions. These are distinctions. These distinctions have had their origin in man himself. Therefore, as they are against the plan and purpose of reality, they are false and imaginary. We are of one physical race, even as we are of one physical plan of material body, each endowed with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 head, 2 feet. And on the right, we've got this beautiful quote from Abdul-Baha: "The earth has one surface. God has not divided the surface by boundaries and barriers to separate races and peoples." So these boundaries and barriers in our world are not created by God to separate races and peoples. That is not their role. So I think this is an important passage to at least discuss in a few sentences at the very least. Jeremiah, what do you have as your opinion on this? And Rose, please, you're welcome.
I can't say that I really have anything specific to say. I mean, it's pretty much outlines it, says it all right there.
So I have a question for you, because people don't know this as commonly nowadays, because now it's race, and the issue of race has evolved into other issues than what it was back then as well in some respects. Why is it that the English, French, and German, and Turkish, and Persians are different from each other? Are they all not human beings? What is the separation between these people? Why was it important, the separation?
I mean, in the context of history, it was all about wealth and land ownership.
Well, I could say that the Turkish, particularly the Ottoman Empire at the time, and the Persians, they definitely had a religious distinction in terms of the state religion from the English, the French, and Germans. And even among the English, French, and Germans, there were distinctions. You have many Protestant Germans. The Germans of Europe are different from the Catholic French, which are different from the Anglican, also Protestant, but Anglican English. Very different religious distinctions there. Very different, even though they seem to be all Christian in Europe, and the Turkish and Persians are all Muslim. The Turkish are Sunni majority, and the Persians are Shia majority. Another distinction within Islam. And to go even further, you also have, of course, the Zoroastrians of Persia, which is just a solely Persian thing in terms of where you find Zoroastrian people, of what race they belong to. They're particularly Persian. But then you find Turkish people, they identify it as Muslim, and effectively the Germans, of course, we talked about Christian and French Christian, what kind of Christian and so forth. But the fact is, they didn't just see that as their difference. They also saw it among their own continent in Europe. They also sought out differences there. As it was not mentioned here, the Italians and the Irish who visited America, who came here to the United States with hopes and dreams, they were treated badly. They were treated badly because they were not considered white. We're talking about the Irish and the Italians. They were not considered white. They came here. They were all European, but they were different for some reason, and they deserved for some reason to be treated differently. Why is that? Why is it that the English and the French and the Germans and the Turkish and the Persians all saw each other as different? Is it just because you think of wealth? Was it really just the wealth? Do you think that maybe they believed in other things beyond this, Jeremiah?
You know, I think to a large extent it had to do with wealth, the gap between the rich and the poor. I think again in that context specifically, yeah, there could have been some cultural differentiations that also were there, but I think to a large extent it was classism in that particular case. When it comes to the Irish, the French, and the Irish and the Italians immigrating over here in the beginning. But I can't really speak too much in regards to a lot of that. But yeah, the only thing I can really say is that in regards to the concept of these borders and it's not, again, it comes to the concept of the unity of all of mankind, and the distinction is not about who is left out and who is kept in, or who is perceived as being external versus internal. We're supposed to shift our thinking to understanding that we are the same people. Species seems so clinical, but that's what it is. It's like if you can't perceive that one commonality, then there really is no hope for humanity, because we all have that one common denominator, and if being human isn't that, then we truly have a lot more to learn about ourselves and to understand, and hopefully we can do that before we destroy ourselves.
And I think that was very important you mentioned this. The point of why we also brought this up, besides the issue of the class as well, and the reasons that you brought up, which I think are valid, it is this concept that Abdul-Baha said here, that they are false and imaginary. The fact that just a century ago, people were viewed as a lesser being within the same European continent. The fact that anything had to do with it, like their religious convictions and all these other things that was used as justification to say one is better than another. The fact that all of this existed, and the fact that it's been so fluid as it is now today, where these what was considered differences are no longer there in some respects for some people. The fact that it's so fluid, this situation where this disease mutates so much, where people, to justify maintaining it, they change their story and they change the basis of why racism should continue. Just analyzing this history of racism as we've gone over in the past several weeks, as well as relating to it today, it should exemplify this idea that we have a very clear response that is not changing, that has been a reality and will remain a reality. And then this justification for what is so untrue, this racial assumption that we have as a human race, still clinging to it in some forms or another, that for some reason, by our own imagination, we are so different. And it's changing. The reasons keep changing. because there is no valid reason. There never was a valid reason. It's all been in our head the whole time. And we need to stop banging our head on the wall saying that racism is okay and justifying any reasons for it, even if it's a little thing to say that these people do that, for example. It's important because a group of people don't call a religion their own because they belong to a race. And that's how we've also devolved religion. Religion isn't something that should be, I believe in this because my father believes in this. Religion is something that you arrive to of your own investigation to see, is it the truth? To acknowledge the truth that is your truth, not to culturally identify with a religion, not to culturally identify with a creed, to culturally identify with a race. There's no inheritance of these things. Though your parents may be something, it does not justify that you are. And therefore, what your parents have done is not something that should be used against you or for you. It shouldn't be something that benefits you unless your parents want to give something to you, like, I don't know, something nice. It could be wealth, their resources. It could be something that's a family heirloom. It could be whatever. But these are material things that isn't tied to your race, because that's a construct that you've created. And as Abdul Baha said very clearly here, these distinctions have had their origin in man himself. Therefore, as they are against the plan and purpose of reality, they are false and imaginary. We are of one physical race, even as we are of one physical plan of material body, each endowed with 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 head, 2 feet. So this premise that you think you are of a race and that is important to you, that is a delusion. You need to get rid of that. Start asking questions. How does it relate to reality? The reality isn't changing, but the justifications for maintaining the delusions change. There is a number of important principles that form the core of Baha'i perspective on race. There is only one human species. While the construct of race may represent some physical differences in humans, it has no basis in reality. Therefore, discriminating against a particular group of people because of their physical characteristics, such as skin color, and depriving them of their basic human rights is unacceptable. And as the quote says on the right, we may have different religions, different languages, different colored skin, but we all belong to one human race. The beloved guardian explains in paragraph 53 that the only acceptable discrimination based on race is that of positive discrimination in favor of minorities. The first obligation of any Baha'i is to nurture, encourage, and safeguard any minority within it, regardless of which faith, race, or nation they belong. Shoghi Effendi highlights a number of specific outcomes that should result from this significant principle. A, if an equal number of ballots are cast in an election for people from different races, faiths, or nationalities, then priority should be given to the person representing the minority. B, it is the duty of every Baha'i community to arrange its affairs so that its diverse minority elements are represented in its assemblies, conventions, conferences, and committees. C, adoption of this principle will not only be a source of encouragement for minority groups, but it would demonstrate the universality of the faith of Baha'u'llah and its freedom from any type of prejudice. It's a very simple principle that if there is a minority, there's less of them. Whatever the minority may be, there's less. And typically, if it's a small amount, it's only rational to understand if there is a vote and you have, say, a population that votes 50% for the minority and the minority view, the minority, period, that this priority should be given to the person that represents the minority so that there is a voice, there is minority, there are minority voices we need to have the voice of the minorities heard so that a society can accommodate for all of its peoples. It needs to accommodate. It needs to provide So continuing on positive discrimination against minorities, the principle of positive discrimination was built into by the bylaws that govern Baha'i institutions in the United States and subsequently into other national Baha'i communities. The application of this principle is illustrated in message sent by the Universal House of Justice to the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, dated January 35, 1967. Since the Guardian's instruction on this point is unequivocal, where it is obvious that one of the persons involved represents a minority, that person should be accorded the priority without question. Where there is doubt, further balloting will allow every voter present to participate. With reference to the provision in Article 5 of the national bylaws governing the situation where two or more members have received the same highest number of votes. The same highest number of votes. If one of those members represents a minority, that individual should be given priority as if selected by lot. In another letter written on behalf of the Supreme Body to the National Spiritual Assembly of the United Kingdom, dated March 5, 1986, some clarification is provided on the definition of a minority. The definition of a minority in any locality is the discretion of the National Spiritual Assembly. It is clear that pioneers from other lands should not be regarded as belonging to a minority. Neither do the categories quoted by the Guardian in the Advent of Divine Justice, namely faith, race, class, or nation, include sex. The overriding principle is always that if there is any doubt as to whether the minority principle should be invoked, then a further ballot should be taken. Freedom from racial prejudice. In paragraph 54, the beloved Guardian observes that an increasingly large section of the human race was a victim of the brutality of racial prejudice at the time. Shoghi Effendi asserts that freedom from racial prejudice should be a core aim of the Baha'i community. It should be practiced in all aspects of their lives and be a keynote policy of the National Spiritual Assembly to facilitate its application to the community. In paragraphs 55 and 56, Shoghi Effendi cites some references from Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha regarding the unity of mankind and abandonment of racial prejudice. Jeremiah? Jeremiah, could you read this?
In paragraph 57 and 58, the beloved Guardian states that tremendous effort is required by both races in the relationship with each other to reflect the spirit and teachings of the faith. They should abandon forever the false doctrine of racial superiority. Tremendous effort always reaps success. Race hate isn't human nature. Race hate is the abandonment of human nature. And repeat after me. No matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It is my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimately discrimination. Shoghi Effendi provides a strategy for both white and black races to achieve freedom from ingrained prejudices. According to paragraph 58, the white race should make a supreme effort to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, abandon their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, correct their patronizing attitudes towards members of other races, persuade the Black race of their genuine friendship and the sincerity of their intentions. Show patience if no response is received from the Black race. White people do something. An art installation on the campus of Temple University's Tyler School of Art, created by Kara Springer, a Tyler sculpture graduate student. The piece is to the point. White people do something. According to paragraph 58, the Black race should demonstrate a supreme effort by every means in their power, the warmness of their response, and their readiness to forget the past, their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still be in their hearts and minds. According to paragraph 58, Shoghi Effendi states, let neither race think that the solution to the problem exclusively concerns the other, that such a problem can either be easily or immediately resolved, that they can wait confidently for the solution until the initiative is taken, that anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. And then this is a quote from Henry Ford, coming together is the beginning, staying together is a process, and working together is success. Power through unity. At the end of paragraph 56, His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha warns, for if it is not realized, ere long great difficulties will arise and harmful results will follow. This warning is then reiterated, if this matter remaineth without change, enmity will be increased day by day, and the final result will be hardship and may end in bloodshed. At the end of paragraph 58, the beloved guardian asks both races to believe and be firmly convinced that on their mutual understanding, their amity and sustained cooperation must depend more than any other force or organization operating outside the circle of their faith, the deflection of that dangerous course so greatly feared by Abdu'l-Baha, and the materialization of the hopes he cherished for their joint contribution to the fulfillment of that country's glorious destiny. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Martin Luther King. Casting away once and for all the fallacious doctrine of racial superiority. Shoghi Effendi. Progress on race unity has been slow in the United States, although African Americans have been given legal equality and can potentially benefit from all the opportunities open to white Americans. Racial prejudice is still ingrained in the society, and there's segregation between white and black as other races. In a letter written on behalf of the beloved guardian to an individual believer dated 30 January 1941, it is mentioned, in America, where racial prejudice is still so widely prevalent, it is the responsibility of the believers to combat and uproot it with all of their force. First, by endeavoring to introduce into the cause as many racial and minority groups as they can approach and teach. Second, by stimulating close friendship and intercourse between them and the rest of the community. At a time when the whole world is steeped in prejudices of race, class, and nation, the Bahá'ís, by upholding firmly and loyally this cardinal principle of their faith, can best hope to vindicate its truth and establish its right to bring order and peace out of the chaos and strife of the war-torn world. From a letter written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi to an individual believer, January 20th, 1941. Bullets addressed for emphasis. The best way to thank God is to love one another, Abdul Baha. In a letter to the world's religious leaders dated April 2002, the Universal House of Justice explains racial and ethnic prejudices have been subjected to equally summary treatment by historical processes that have little patience left for such pretensions. Here, rejection of the past has been especially decisive. Racism is now tainted by its association with the horrors of the 20th century to the degree that it has taken on something of the character of a spiritual disease. While surviving as a social attitude in many parts of the world and as a blight on the lives of a significant segment of humanity, of humankind, racial prejudice has become so universally condemned in principle that no body of people can any longer safely allow themselves to be identified with it. This is from the Universal House of Justice, letter to the world's religious leaders, April 2002. The Universal House of Justice continues. It is not that a dark past has been erased and a new world of light has suddenly been born. Vast numbers of people continue to endure the effects of ingrained prejudices of ethnicity, gender, nation, caste, and class. All the evidence indicates that such injustices will long persist as the institutions and standards that humanity is devising only slowly become empowered to construct a new order of relationships and to bring relief to the oppressed. The point, rather, is that a threshold has been crossed from which there is no credible possibility of return. Fundamental principles have been identified, articulated, accorded broad publicity, and are becoming progressively incarnated in institutions capable of imposing them on public behavior. There is no doubt that, however protracted and painful the struggle, the outcome will be revolutionized relationships among all peoples at the grassroots level. The Universal House of Justice, letter to the world religious leaders, April 2002. The need is very great everywhere in the world, in and outside the faith, for a true spiritual awareness to pervade and motivate people's lives. No amount of administrative procedure or adherence to rules can take the place of this sole characteristic, this spirituality, which is the essence of man. Shoghi Effendi. It's from a letter dated, if you go back, from a letter dated 23rd April 1945, written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi to an individual believer. It is time for parents to teach young people early on that in diversity, there's beauty and there's strength. Maya Angelou. The chief reason for the evils now.
Wait, what just
rampant
happened? Hold on. What is this? Oh, it's a video. Here we go. I missed it. Tell me, please, if you can hear it, Jeremiah.
So many of the principles of the Bahá'í.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to play it now. Oops. Sorry, guys.
So many of the principles of the Baha'i faith, when they were first expressed in the middle of the 19th century in Persia, seemed completely unrealistic. And by now, the human race has grown and evolved to the point where they almost seem like truisms. So we have a belief in the oneness of humanity, and the corollary of that is the elimination of all forms of prejudice, whether of race or class or educational level or ethnicity. And when those principles first started to penetrate the consciousness, for example, here in the United States, the first American Bahá'ís became Bahá'ís in the early 1900s. And they were encouraged to think about race in a whole new way. And at that time, the ideas they were promoting, things like interracial marriage and interracial worship meetings, were frankly illegal in many parts of this country. And yet the Bahá'ís persisted in holding integrated meetings for worship and community, and really giving an example through action of this principle of the oneness of humanity.
Okay, now Jeremiah, if you could please read this quote.
The chief reason for the evils now rampant in society is the lack of spirituality. Shoghi Effendi.
A lack of spirituality. And materialism is kind of counteractive to this, right?
No, not counteracting, accelerating it.
The lack of spirituality?
Accelerating the
yeah,
lack of spirituality.
Yeah, so I meant that materialism is opposed to spirituality, right?
Correct.
Okay, so this concept of materialism that people are worshiping, racism comes out as a construct of that, right? You're mentioning resources and stuff. If you worship the resources, you find means to do bad things to keep the resources.
Intense is the hatred in America between black and white, but my hope is that the power of the kingdom will bind these two in friendship and serve them as a healing balm. Abdul Baha.
I'll read the left. Shed the light of a boundless love on every human being whom you meet, whether of your country, your race, your political party, or of any other nation, color, or shade of political opinion. Heaven will support you while you work in this ingathering of the scattered peoples of the world beneath the shadow of the almighty tent of unity.
The ages of darkness have passed away and the century of light has come. Ignorant prejudices are being dispelled. The light of unity is shining. The differences existing between nations and peoples will soon be annulled, and the fundamentals of the divine religions, which are no other than the oneness and solidarity of the human race, are being established. Abdul Baha.
Love for each other, the deep sense that we are in a love for each other, the deep sense that we are a new organism, the dawn breakers of a new world order, must constantly animate our Baha'i lives, and we must pray to be protected from the contamination of society, which is so diseased with prejudice. This is from a letter written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi to the Spiritual Assembly of Atlanta, Georgia, on February 5, 1947. Just as a fever is a symptom of disease in the body, racism is a symptom of disease in society. Suppressing the symptom does not cure the disease, but curing the disease eliminates the symptom. The Baha'i international community is convinced that the disease from which society currently suffers is a failure to recognize the principle of the oneness of humanity, and racism is but a symptom. The Baha'i international community is convinced that the disease from which society currently suffers is failure to recognize the principle of the oneness of humanity, and racism is but a symptom. If we wish to eliminate racism entirely, we must establish as the moral of foundation for society the unshakable conviction of the oneness of the human race.
The diversity in the human family should be the cause of love and harmony. As it is in music, there are many different notes blend together in the making of a perfect chord. Abdul Baha. Ten qualities everyone needs if we are to heal racial wounds. Destiny of America. Number 1, genuine love. Number 2, extreme patience. Number 3, true humility. Number 4, consummate tact. Number 5, sound initiative. Number 6, mature wisdom. And number 7, deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort. Number 8, mutual understanding. Number 9, their enmity. And number 10, sustained cooperation. 5 things white people can do to change the destiny of America. Make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem. Abandon once for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority. Number 3, their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race. Number 4, persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions. Number 5, master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such a grievous and slow healing wounds. From Shoghi Effendi, Advent of Divine Justice, page 40 to 41.
Could you hear that, Jeremiah? Could you hear the
No,
music?
I didn't hear it. No.
Okay, I have to play it again. Thank you.
Abdu'l-Baha's life becomes a model for how we are to behave. I mean, we know this and we hear this, the perfect exemplar. Then, of course, this leads into just a few decades later to Shoghi Effendi, who writes what I consider the Bible of the American Baha'i community, which is the Advent of Divine Justice. You must memorize this book, friends, from this cover to that cover, and then read it again. Read it to your children, have them read it to you, have the Baha'i youth share it with their friends. And the focus, of course, is on our mission. And our mission is to teach the African American and the Native American communities. When I first became a Baha'i, one of the things I did was, when I got back to campus, after I was a Baha'i for a month, I had read Baha'i books, but I hadn't really studied them. And so I ordered 4 Baha'i books, and I just sort of buried myself in them for about 2 months. And one of them was The Advent of Divine Justice. The other one was The World Order of Baha'u'llah. And I was completely blown away. I had never read anything about this. And you see these ideas of the Guardian. The Guardian writes as if he's a social scientist. He writes as if he's a social observer, because he's getting all this data from different parts of the world. And then, you know, in retrospect, of course, the Guardian had unpacked implicit bias 70 years before Harvard ever came up with this initiative, this implicit bias test. 70 years. If that's the kind of vision that the Guardian had in that book, it's another reason to go back and read it, because there are all these precious gems in it that that are shared with us from a spiritual point of view. But the next important part, after the responsibility is to pass the message of Baha'u'llah on to Native Americans and African Americans, beyond mass declaration that went on in the 60s and 70s, is what I call the 7-point behavioral model that is contained in that book that explicitly and basically and clearly explains what Negroes are to do and what whites are to do. And translate those into the parlance of today: white folks, black folks, white folks, people of color. Those 7 behaviors, with greater clarity than I've ever read anywhere in any kind of writing, tells me exactly what I have to do. Usually inherent feelings of superiority, sometimes subconscious. He didn't choose words like opened up the dictionary and said, oh, gee, I like this word. He chose the words very specifically because he understood what was going on in America. I've used them as a coach and a trainer for years. I use them all the time in training sessions. They're infallible. They're absolutely infallible because they get to the very core of how and where we hide. They get to the very core of the games we play. They get to the very core of the ways that we try to avoid dealing with the most challenging issue. He called it that for a reason.
That was a beautiful explanation. Racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life, while blighting the progress of the rest of the humankind. It cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and will not designate anyone as other. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all moral and spiritual. That is it, everyone. So we have discussed these very weighty paragraphs, and we are now at the point where we have concluded the discussion, the reading, and the study, and we are ready to do session number 26 next week on Sunday. We will continue on to the next paragraphs, and more importantly, these weighty paragraphs we've just discussed, they are definitely alone something that can be reviewed and reviewed and reviewed, studied and studied more and more, because they have implications that are far-reaching, applications that have yet to be fully employed in our country. And if we utilize them, if we take them to heart and put them in our everyday lives, we can be the sources of that solution rather than contributors to the problem. And with that all being said, we wish you all a very beautiful Sunday. It is, as you know, January 16, 2022. And we're going to be closing off with our closing prayer. And as soon as the prayer is done, we will be terminating the session for today. And we hope that you can take the time in silence to meditate on the subject that we've spoken of today. And of course, to read for next week as we go on to the next 2 paragraphs. Thank you very much. Jeremiah, could you do the honors of reading this? Or Actually, you said it's loud in your area. Sorry, Jeremiah. Amira, can you say the prayer, please?
Oh my God, thou seest me in my lowliness and weakness, occupied with the greatest undertaking, determined to raise thy word among the masses and to spread thy teachings among thy peoples. How can I succeed unless thou assist me with the shower upon me, but with the breath of the Holy Spirit, help me to triumph by the host of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change, and not into an eagle or drop of water into rivers and seas, and an atom into lights and suns. O my Lord, assist me with thy triumphant and effective might, so that my tongue may utter thy praises and attributes among all people, and my soul overflow with the wine of thy love and knowledge. Thou art the omnipotent and the doer of its of thou willest. Abdul Baha.